to win a Global Leadership Award, you have to build a company. You have to be global in your technology. You have to be local in your feedstock. You have to do more than just be about a commodity. You have to connect technologies. You have to do circular things, not just because they're good for carbon, but because, as we've said on stage, we want to change something in this world where it was do good or do well. And we said that the mission of the bioeconomy is to replace that or with an and, that you can do good and do well. And that's what the Global Leadership Award is all about, people who are setting the conditions for that and showing the way. But like Dan O's Ag Certain, taking a platform that maybe is not as sexy as some of the amazing technologies that you see with companies like Aemetis, taking a small company, maybe you acquire it at an attractive price, like a Maytag, or maybe it's a corn ethanol plant that didn't quite make it in the middle of near Modesto in California. And you start building around it, using that cash flow and using that credit that comes from it. And you start bringing in technologies like cellulosic. You start bringing in biogas, carbon sequestration. You make renewable diesel. You make jet fuel. You do the entire bioeconomy in one place. Yet at the same time, you duplicate that model all around the world. And in this particular case, our recipient this year, Eric McAfee, exemplifies all of that because he has built a company. He's built a company that's strong in India, which is our #1 hottest place to do projects. He's also built a company that's strong in the United States, our #2 country to build projects in. He thinks technology is global, feedstock is local. He connects technologies. He's circular because it does good and does well. And he took a very small platform, a very small facility that was making corn ethanol, which is not the sexiest molecule in the world, but it's a smart molecule to start with because you can build a company around it, exactly like Dan O did with REG and exactly like he's going to do with Ag Certain. And he's built a platform and is building a platform deploying biogas. Many of the technologies that you are developing today are actually being deployed at this gentleman's facility because of vision. And it's the kind of vision that we like to talk about. The real progressives, we've said many times, and he's a real progressive because he actually makes progress. He's a real agent of change because he actually changes things. And here to accept, I hope, in 2 seconds, the Global Leadership Award. Please rise and join me in welcoming Eric McAfee, the CEO of Aemetis.
Jim is gracious in giving me much credit because I want to give the credit actually to the thousands of members of our management teams, our investors, our vendors, our suppliers, our customers, who have shared with us over the last, actually more than 2 decades, the vision of what the Earth could be if we were to move from using high carbon, high pollution, non-renewable energy to using renewable energy. But I do want to make a note of one thing, and that is everybody in this room has a whole population of people sitting at home who enable them to do what they're doing. That's our families, our spouses, our children, our parents. They are the reason that we're able to be free to come here to discuss great visions of the future, to implement projects, to work together, collaborate. That doesn't happen in a vacuum. And I want to thank my wife, Marguerite, my children, and my friends for their support during these years in which it's been a long road. And we've had many, many successes, but they are unrecognized and often unseen as key parts of our success. So when you go home tonight or tomorrow, please give them a hug or a kiss and thank them. Let's talk about Aemetis. I grew up on a farm, by the way, at the end of a mile of dirt road, about 15 miles west of Fresno. Nearest town was 10 miles away. Had 4 brothers and loved throwing dirt clods at each other. And one of the things we noticed was that we burned a lot of biomass. And if anybody's seen my TEDx talk in Chandigarh, India, about 50 miles from the Pakistani border, I actually compared the Central Valley of California to the base of the Himalayas and the polluted cities in India, about how we burn our agricultural waste rather than turn it into valuable fuels and chemicals. And Aemetis is actually a vehicle over the last 15 years for us actually to adopt technologies that have provided a future for what otherwise is pollution. And this slide, I think, is the core of much of what we see that is slightly different than the world. The world thinks largely of first-generation renewable energy. It's using the sun's energy, solar, wind, hydro, and nuclear. Actually, I just was invited to present at a conference at Stanford, and I couldn't find the box to check because when they said renewables, they said solar, wind, hydro. There was no box for renewable fuels at all at this global annual Stanford University Center on Renewable Energy. And I think that is an opportunity for our industry, communicating that second-generation renewable energy is when we actually absorb CO2 in addition to using the sun's energy to grow plants. That's all the biofuels, ethanol, renewable diesel, everything. You take a plant, you turn it into something valuable, and you replace carbon-intensive petroleum. The third, however, is our future. And that is use solar energy, use the sun's power, absorb CO2 from the atmosphere, but don't put it back in the atmosphere. Sequester it, put it into cement and valuable products, put it in the ground. But in so doing, you're creating a siphon, much like the irrigation that I used to do at 4 o'clock in the morning when I was out in the farm with my dad, and it was freezing, raining, cold. It influenced my decision to go to college. By taking essentially a simple irrigation concept of siphoning CO2 out of the atmosphere and putting it in the ground or in valuable products, we are creating ourselves a source of a future in which carbon intensity of the atmosphere actually could literally be reversed. We could reverse the effects of climate change. Aemetis, most of you know about the company. We're 15 years old. We have an ethanol plant which we migrated into looking all the inputs and all the outputs, decarbonize the inputs, create more valuable outputs. I won't go into this slide in much detail, but we are spending about $380 million, taking about 65 dairies, and we've already completed some of that project into a major renewable natural gas project. We're building about $500 million jet and diesel project. We've signed $7 billion of offtake agreements with 10 airlines and a major truck company. We're doing about $250 million carbon sequestration project. And we're bringing in refined tallow from our facility that's already completely debt-free and operating in India. And we're bringing in biodiesel and the like from India, which has tallow feedstock. And we are the major player, actually, probably much more than the major player in India, in being able to acquire that feedstock and turn it into feedstock for our California operations. The project here, next couple slides are just mostly for the stock analysts. This will be posted at the SEC today, and so gives them something to chew on. That's how much money we're going to be spending and when. This is interesting to all of us, though. This is a slide that I would like you to actually think about as an entrepreneur. At the top is the money we need to spend. At the bottom is a brand new Inflation Reduction Act opportunity to fund the industry the same way the solar and wind industry was funded, which is generate investment tax credits by building things or production tax credits by producing things, and then monetize those tax credits. So this slide actually shows you kind of the matching of the things happening above and the things happening below. And if you sell a stream of future tax credits, you can actually do exactly what they do in solar, which is you get your permits and your contracts, and then you sell your future tax credits to provide your equity. Over the next year or two, this is the major business opportunity of our industry, is to teach investors and brokers and lawyers and accountants and policymakers and everybody else about how we're just like the solar industry. They happen to sign 25-year power purchase agreements and we don't, but other than that small trivial matter, we have the same business opportunity, and I would like us all to work together to achieve that sort of confidence among investors. From that, we build a $2 billion company over the next 60 months. From that, we generate over $680 million of positive cash flow over the next 60 months, building out these synergistic businesses, starting with a good old ethanol plant. 65 million gallon plant, largest in California, and we are turning it into essentially an electric powered plant because our electricity comes from hydroelectric and solar. We're putting in a solar facility that will be completed later on this year. And we took the dehydration unit, swapped it out to a Mitsubishi Xerox unit, the first one in North America. And in general, we're turning this to an electrified fuels plant to lower the carbon intensity, thereby increase the value of the ethanol. But since we supply over 80 dairies, about 100,000 dairy cows with animal feed, the 28% of the corn kernel that does not become sugar is fiber, protein, and oil, and that is an animal feed. So we build a 40-mile pipeline. We have 6 digesters up and running now. We've got a dozen other ones in process. And we built the centralized interconnect. This all took only about $80 million and only about 4 years to do, but it's done. And now we're just going to go put some additional digesters in place because the pipeline's actually already there and the interconnect's already there. So this has already been operating, went in service in January of this year. The process, again, this is mostly for analysts, but I call this solar biogas because there's really no moving parts in our digesters. They just sit there, and we use solar energy to get the microbes into a happy environment, and then they make biogas for us. I make the joke that our maintenance crew's #1 expense is golf club memberships because we're primarily just watching electric motors spin. It's a little more complex than that, I'm sure, but reality is this is a very, very scalable operation in California, which has plenty of solar energy and over 1,000 dairies, over 1.7 million dairy cows. This is the completed and fully operational biogas cleanup unit, and there at the bottom, sort of in yellow, is the $5 million PG&E unit. It was a $5 million hard cost plus a lot of indirect costs. We had to pay it. PG&E got to build it, so we got the joy of waiting for a bankrupt utility to build our interconnect to the pipeline. You can imagine that was a bit of an impairment to the confidence in the project, but our decision to just go get it done kind of flowed over to PG&E, and they did get it done, and it was very helpful. So our project funding plan, for some of you in the audience, this is an important part of your business model, is how are you going to fund it? And we put in $30 million of equity from our key investor, and we then got $23 million worth of grants. $53 million of equity was enough to go and get some fundamental infrastructure in place. We then completed a $25 million USDA guaranteed loan. And if you start doing the math, you figure out that we've actually put in $53 million of equity, and that's enough to fund the entire $380 million on the Renewable Energy for America program. As you reinvest the cash flow from the project, the equity is sufficient to do 25% equity and 75% debt. So this project's fully funded, even though it's $380 million. It was done in a stepwise fashion that allows us to meet the USDA Renewable Energy program. I'm going to go through the next slides pretty quickly. Just look on them on our SEC filing if you want to. We bought the U.S. ammunition plant near Modesto, 125 acres, 700,000 square feet of buildings. Why? Because we're putting a jet fuel plant right in the middle of it. Our company is the largest distillers corn oil producer in California and the largest refined tallow producer in the country of India, where the highest and best use of tallow is to do what? Make sustainable aviation fuel and renewable diesel and deliver it in California. So our supply chain stretches all the way to India, where we have an existing plant, and ends up at this plant. We have hydroelectric power lines run right across the middle of the property, so it's 100% hydroelectric power. And this is a process slide for you engineers who are really interested about it. Look at the bottom, you'll see we're using 100% renewable hydrogen by taking the naphtha and propane and feeding it back into the facility, and then augmenting it with gasification, synthesis gas from local orchard woods. And at the bottom is carbon sequestration. Our existing plant, our ethanol plant, is the largest renewable CO2 producer in California. We already compress it at 200 psi, clean it up, and we already sell it using trucks. All we have to do is put a straw in the ground, called an injection well, stuff it down the straw, and it's called CO2 injection. There's no pipeline to do it. So we are doing 2 sequestration wells, one at our ethanol plant and one 15 miles away, which will produce about 200,000 tons a year of our renewable diesel and sustainable aviation fuel plant. This is the footprint of it. And that 24 acres is on the riverbank site. We happen to be right in the middle of one of the world's great saline storage formations. Down the bottom right, you can see that there's a tremendous amount of capacity in the Central Valley. And we have proximity to a whole bunch of oil refiners within 100 miles to be able to bring their CO2 in. So the leaders of this project, Baker Hughes, founded 100 years ago near the Central Valley of California, and ATSI, one of the world's preeminent project managers for oil refiners and commission, both in Asia and North America. We have, last little slide about some of our projects. This was the first project we built 15 years ago. We went to India, and from a piece of dirt, built a $50 million biodiesel plant. That's what's on your left. The largest pharmaceutical glycerin plant in India in the middle, and then power it all on rice husks. We put it in the rice husk capital of India. And then we built a refined tallow unit to feed feedstock to this unit. This business has become a very sustainable and successful business, as the Indian government has figured out that importing crude oil is an expensive habit, and they ought to use domestic feedstock supplies. And so we are the largest biodiesel producer and actually the only foreign investor in biofuels in the country of India at this point in time. So this is my last slide, and I do want you to actually consider how this is going to impact your personal decisions every day when you wake up. That's asking you a lot. Number one, without IRS guidance for tax credit transfer, you can't transfer tax credits. So it's a lot like making 500,000 Teslas, but not yet being approved to actually issue Department of Motor Vehicle licenses. You'd be kind of frustrated if you were Elon Musk and you couldn't actually get any of those Teslas out of your inventory. We generated $57 million of Inflation Reduction Act tax credits so far this year, in the last roughly 75 days, at Aemetis. So far, the net value to that is less than the cost of a Starbucks coffee. We haven't gotten one penny for that $57 million. Last August is when the legislation passed. We are still waiting for 3, 6, 12, 9, I don't know, some number of years. You thought I was going to say months, didn't you? Waiting for the IRS to actually opine on how to transfer these, what the little form is to do it. Every one of you is going to be impacted by this, either directly or indirectly, if you're a vendor to this industry. And we need to be assertive with our political leaders to say that this is unacceptable, that 9 months plus after this legislation's passed, not one penny of it's worth anything to any of you. Subpoint. It provides that nonprofits, tribes, and municipalities can turn those tax credits and get direct pay, get a refund. Nowhere in there does it say that they can't be involved with the transfer of tax credits, that they can't buy it from your project and then submit it to the IRS and get direct pay. It doesn't say that. But I've got a whole legion of lawyers and accountants that say, no, that's not possible. It should be possible, and here's why. If you let this be a commercial bank business, they're going to tell you that their tax liability is limited and there's $30 billion a year of you running around. So if you'd just be willing to go 50-50 with them and give them half of your tax credit, they'll give you the grace of returning your phone call. Don't let that happen. Fund your local nonprofits, your local Indian tribes, and your local town by making them your customer. Trade it to them, let them do direct pay. What does that lead up to? The quarterly filings and payments of taxes by corporations needs to be matched by quarterly direct pay. Take this slide, go to your local congressman and say, why isn't this possible? Why can I not fund the local nonprofits in my community with the money that I otherwise have to give some wealthy commercial bank somewhere? Second, EPA mandates continue to lag the actual markets. Cellulosic RIN mandate, which is the top of the stack, is below the actual expected renewable natural gas production. When you do that, what happens? The D3s then displace the D4s. Who's D4? It's biodiesel and renewable diesel. And so those mandates are below actual production capacity. What does that do? That displaces the D6, which is ethanol. So the 15 billion gallon ethanol mandate's completely worthless. The EPA needs to be committed to the original vision of George Bush when he signed this in December 2007. I was on his advisory board, his technology advisory board, for 8 years. And his vision was energy security and independence. That's the name of the act. And by the EPA not fulfilling the Energy Security and Independence Act's intention, we all are at risk of continuing to be dependent on imported crude oil. Number 3, California Low Carbon Fuel Standard. If any of you guys have a cousin or otherwise who works at CARB, I hope you are pointing out to them that there's been a 70% decline in the price of the credits, and the credits is the only thing they do at CARB. That's all they do. All culmination of all the science and all the talk and all the yak is, are those credits going up or down? In 2024, they have an opportunity for a 20-year reset. What happens when you have 20 years of visibility? You get 20-year financing. That's what this industry needs. Stable policy, stable perspective, like a power purchase agreement with a power company, so you can do 20-year long-term financing to actually scale up your technology. Last point, DOE and USDA loans have very exciting potential. They're fully funded, the legislation's behind us, the regulation's done, the paperwork's done, and everything else, but it takes too long. It's taking 18 to 60 months to complete several DOE projects. USDA is much faster. We need to help improve communication, regular contact, literally multiple times a week if you have an application filing, and you need to be in their office or in their house talking to their dog so they can go ahead and get your project done. We need better communication with these agencies so they can execute better by having better support from us. And then my last point, got to be accountable. If the program says that you got to do 4 things, you do those 4 things, they shouldn't be able to come up with a 5th or 6th thing. This is a business in which jobs and frankly the future of American independence and security are at risk by not executing on time. So the DOE has the money, the USDA has the money, they need our support, they need our help, and frankly, we need to physically get our tails down there, spend time in their offices so they get the sense of purpose that this industry has. I want to close by saying that Ronald Reagan once mentioned that great leaders are not necessarily those who do great things. They're those who inspire others to do great things. And I'd hope in this room, the Advanced Biofuels Leadership Conference, that each of you see yourself as a person who's inspiring others in your companies, in your universities, in your regulatory agencies, frankly, in your family, to do great things. And I appreciate this recognition today.